Well, good Shabbos and welcome. This is Torah study for Shabbos morning, Shabbos afternoon. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein here in sunny Southern California, joined by my dear friend and teacher, Rabbi Mark Gelman in South Florida, and we're delighted to be with you today. Today we are in the middle of the book of Leviticus. We have finished the great holidays of Pesach, of course, and then Yom HaTzmaut, Yom HaShoah, Yom HaZikaron, these wonderful holidays. This Yom HaTzmaut, Mark, was very difficult. It's difficult because there are hostages being held. It's difficult because there's a war in Israel that continues. It's difficult because of the divisions that divide up Israeli society and the Israeli polity. And on top of everything else, as a sort of bitter metaphor for the whole thing, there was this enormous fire outside of Jerusalem that cut off Route 1. Here in California, we know from enormous fires, so I can tell you how frightening this is when the sky turns this dark brown, beige brown, and the sun can't get through, and you can't go anywhere, and it's hard to breathe. And it canceled Yom Ha'atzmaut. People weren't permitted to go to cemeteries to remember their loved ones on Yom HaZikaron, and they canceled the national celebration of Yom Ha'atzmaut. They broadcast on TV the recorded version of the dress rehearsal, but the idea that they had to cancel the
Was it
happiest day of the
arson?
Israel, what?
Was it arson?
It's a big debate. They've arrested some people and accused them, but there's a debate among the firefighters about whether it was arson or not. It turns out that there's been a long history of neglect, much as there was here in California, of territories, areas that should have been protected and cared for in a certain way that you protect from brush fire. You put fire breaks and this kind of stuff. And of course, they didn't want to do that. So there's a debate about how it got started, but as a metaphor for a sort of stained celebration, a celebration that was the metaphor of a cloud coming over Israel on the day it should have been celebrating. It was awfully bitter. It was awfully difficult. So those holidays are past, and we're back to learning Torah now, and we're right in the middle of the book of Leviticus. And the book of Leviticus, as we've pointed out before, is a very technical book. I like to think of it as a tech manual for the priesthood. This was the manual that the priesthood had to know how to be a priest of Israel, how to run the holy temple. And in the middle of it is a set of laws having to do with, well, it's called in English purity. The Hebrew words are tahor and tameh. Tahor means a person who is eligible to participate in the national ritual. And tameh is somebody who is not is disqualified from participating. And in some cases, they're disqualified because they've come across a dead body. There's some cases they're disqualified. Women are disqualified right after childbirth. But in the section that we're reading this week, there's a whole long conversation about something called mitzora, which is obviously some sort of skin disease. We tend to call it leprosy, but it probably isn't what we call leprosy. It's not what Hansen's disease. It's probably some other kind of Middle Eastern malady that was terribly frightening to the people of Israel. And because they had no medicine, I mean, today you give antibiotics and these things go away. This becomes a terror. And the priesthood is the one who has to deal with it. And the simple way of dealing with it is by pushing the person out of the camp until they get better. And so the commentators over the generations, particularly in modernity when we have medicine, have seen this as a metaphor and a metaphor for those social maladies that push us out of the community, those social maladies that cause people to be isolated. So, Mark, the interesting question is, if you want to make this contemporary, is who are the lepers today? Who are the
Yeah,
ones we push out of the social circle and exclude from participation in the full life of the community because we're, I don't know, either somehow put off or worried about their particular social malady?
yeah, that's a great question. And it's important, I think, always to take the parts of the Torah that are completely irrelevant to our lives and show how they are relevant to our lives. Those are the ones I love the most. Because if you can take a parsha like ancient leprosy laws and say, this really speaks to us today, then every part of the Torah speaks to us. If you can do that with Tazria Mitzorah. So that's why I love it. I also think it's relevant because of exactly what you say. Now, let's first just take the positive elements of Tazria Metzora, because we, in general, think of excluding people from the community as a negative thing. But actually, it was very positive. These were public health officials. We forget this was before medicine.
Hmm.
So the only thing they could do is protect the larger number by quarantining those who had infectious diseases. It was exactly the right thing to do, and it protected the community from some kind of whatever the infectious disease was. So that's the positive part of this. The negative part is that one of the ways we define our community is by who we cut out. I did my rabbinic thesis on the Jewish heretic. That is, people who were cut out of Judaism at different periods of time, because I feel the best way to identify what a community believes is by looking at its edges.
Hmm.
So if you look at American culture and you ask who are the lepers in American culture, I have my own unique little list, the Gelman list of modern day lepers, and it begins with people who are not beautiful. One of my favorite studies was a study of children in a preschool class who were given two teachers on two separate days. One of the teachers was a supermodel, and the other teacher was a homely looking teacher who was a brilliant teacher. And at the end of the 2 days, they asked the kids who was the better teacher. And they almost all said the pretty teacher was the better teacher
Mm.
because of the prejudice on behalf of pretty people. And and of course, all the apparently all the fathers voted for the supermodel also.
Right. Yeah. Right. Right.
But but basically, it's who can get a cab on the street, or now they have Ubers. They don't have cabs anymore. But there's a tremendous, tremendous deference given to people who are beautiful,
Hmm.
and people who are not so beautiful have a longer road to go. And that's my first modern leper. Um, for men and boys, boys who are not athletic, it's very important for boys in their forming of early masculinity to be active in sports. But if you're not coordinated or have no interest in sports, it's kind of tough. And you're kind of an outcast. Or to put it another way, you're the last guy chosen for the baseball team at recess.
Mm.
And that's very difficult if you don't have any sports skills. I didn't have a lot of sports skills, but I was a good golfer. So that was my one hook that I could get in. And I got a letter jacket for it. And I can tell you, wearing that letter jacket was like wearing a mantle of manhood. And it was incredibly important that I got that.
Right. So I was the opposite. I was the very unathletic kid. And in high school, I got into debate. And
Yeah,
my high school, which was not a terrific school, it was a really kind of lower quality school, but we had a great debate squad. There were about 10, 12 of us. We ate lunch together, we hung together, and we did really well. We went really far into the state tournaments. And I remember this moment. So we had a championship football team that won the city championship one year. And these guys strutted around the campus, you know. So at one point, our debate team went to the principal and said, the other local high school, whose debate team wasn't as good as ours, gives debate champions letter jackets because
really.
they bring honor to the school. It's
Oh,
competition. It brings honor to the school. Why can't the debate team have letter jackets? Right?
wow.
And the principal just shut us down. He just said, no way. Letter jackets belong to athletes. And we said, why? We compete. we bring honor to the school. We like why so we don't run fast and we don't hit hard and we don't but we do important stuff for this. Oh, he just put us away. He
Hmm.
put us away. And then I remember this moment when I graduated school. He made his principal speech. And my father literally got up and left the graduation because the guy said that one of my colleagues who was the valedictorian of the school gave a talk and he said, it's great that we had a football team that was so accomplished, but the fact is the school is for learning and we should be honor people who were, the honor students and learning. And the principal got up and said, in a society, philosophers, plumbers are every bit as important as philosophers. Otherwise, neither our pipes nor our ideas hold water. That's what the guy said. And my father got up and left and said, how do we what kind of lunacy is this? He was so angry. So
What a great story.
but see, it's an interesting question. So you're right. The idea of as kids, athletic
Boys, as
kids,
boys.
athletic boys were honored, and us unathletic nerds, you know, we're
Right.
we're 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 shunted aside.
Now, the next item on my leper list is something that my wife Betty taught me because she was a special ed teacher.
Hmm.
And she said, "You have no idea how vigorously parents argue for their children not to be put in special ed."
Yeah.
I said, "What, are you kidding me? It's why wouldn't they want their kid to have extra teaching and extra attention?" She said, "No, it's the stigma." And
Right.
the other kids call them SPEDS, SPEDS,
Yeah, or worse.
special
Or
education.
or worse. They call them worse things.
Yeah,
Yes.
they do. And so people who are not smart are also
Well,
lepers.
no, that's different. It's not smart. It's not smart. It's people who have learning differences. I,
Learning
I and I want to
disability.
say this right. We've just had a program at the synagogue with a wonderful author named Jonathan Mooney, who wrote a remarkable book. It has a facetious title, but it's a fabulous book. It's called Normal Sucks. That's it. And he points out it's a remarkable study because he points out that what we've done is we've taken kids with learning differences, and he says everyone has some kind of learning difference. But we define differences as disabilities. And then as disabilities, we define them as deficiencies. And
Right.
when you do that, you say to a kid, well, you can't. You can't, right? And it's a remarkable process of you're right, of leperizing a certain population of kids who were told you're never going to succeed in school, you're never teachable, you're never going to make it, and we shunt them aside. And exactly right. The stigma is quite remarkable.
We were friends of Henry Viscardi, Tommy and I. And Henry was really the Martin Luther King of the disabilities community.
Uh-huh.
He was responsible for the national disabilities legislation getting passed. And he was born without limbs and almost without limbs and very severe disability. But he was joyous and powerful and wonderful. One day I'm talking to Hank and he says, Mark, I never I never say that anyone is disabled. What I say is that everybody else is temporarily abled, temporarily abled. And if you look at your life that way and say, look, I'm okay now, but I'm going to be disabled soon or at some point in my life, and we're all on the same spectrum. The next leper list, I would include for women. We talked about women who may not be beautiful and the prejudice against them. Divorced and widowed women. This is
Mm.
for younger and older women, many of whom I met over my years, some in your synagogue, some in my own. As soon as your husband dies, let's say, all of a sudden you're not invited to the same groups anymore.
Hmm.
Some people say, well, it's because women don't want you hitting on their husbands or uh, crazy stuff. But I think it's just a prejudice. against unaccompanied women who are unaccompanied because they're divorced or widowed. And it's very difficult for them. In our club, there's a table where women sit together. And it's sort of like I see it like a leper table. And it's
Mm,
very unfortunate and unfair. Um, I'm an old guy now, and I have to include old people on the leper list. There are times when, sometimes I'm treated better because I'm old. Sometimes I'm condescended to because I'm old. And I may not be as quick or as fluid in my walking and moving through life. But there's no question that at some point in your life, you understand that people are relating to you as an old guy.
hmm
And they'll do things like compliments or, oh, you're so young, your face looks so young, or what's wrong with Lifnei Seva Takum? What's
Right. Well, this is an important point. This is American culture adopted an idea from the Greek culture, which is you are your body. And if you are your body, then you peak at age 20,
yeah,
because after that it's downhill, right? And the idea then is that you have to maintain your youthful appearance and youthful stature in order to have value, right? Because first of all, we value people based on their youth. And see, American culture, everything that's good is new and improved and young and creative. And the proof is it, have you ever seen a product on television guaranteed to make you look older in minutes a day? I mean, it's not. It's everything, all of these ads and all of this
new and improved.
new and improved. And the Jewish tradition looked at human beings differently. They looked at human beings as souls, as neshamas, who were embodied. So you have to take care of the body as the vessel for the soul. But as long as you're a soul, you actually get better as you get older.
Yep,
That when the Talmud talks about the qualities of old age, you get to 70, which is seva, and 80, which is gvura. These qualities of getting older because the soul mellows, it becomes wise, it becomes deep. And so in the Jewish tradition, you give deference and respect to the elderly. In American culture, we pretend that we do, but what we really want to do is get them out of the way,
yep,
right? So you create villages like Leisure World and stuff place, put all the old people in some place where they can all be children again.
yeah.
And there really isn't a role for older people in our culture, in American culture.
Well, it's even worse. Sometimes there's actual hostility. In the arguments about Medicare spending, it's old against young.
Yeah.
There's an argument made by young people, sometimes in exactly these words. A politician once said, "Why don't old people just help the country by dying?"
Mm,
No, and there's really kind of an antipathy toward a system where 80% of Medicare expenditures are expended on 10% of the members, old people.
hmm
So they are on the leper list. The most important new addition to the leper list is the political opposition.
mm,
It used to be that there would be congressmen and senators across the aisle who would debate furiously something and then go out and have a drink together. And this was sort of a very important characteristic of the Senate, that despite differences of ideology, there was a sense of comity and personal friendship across the aisle. Now, the political opposition are Nazis or fascists.
mm,
There's no such thing as, well, there's an interesting point from our political opponents. We understand that point. We disagree with this and this, but let's work together to try and find a way in which we can all accommodate our deepest core beliefs. So it's clearly different now. Political arguments go immediately to who's Hitler.
mm,
And in this week of Yom HaShoah, it's important to remember you can't use Hitler as an analogy for anything. Hitler is beyond analogizing. The evil was so profound and deep and entrenched, it can't be used to compare somebody to something else. I remember going crazy at a Holocaust center. You know, there's hundreds of them now around the country. One was on Long Island, and they were getting government funding, so they tried to broaden the message. We took some kids from the synagogue there once, and a woman presenting said, "You know about the Holocaust? You know how in your class there's bullies? Well, the Nazis were like bullies." No, no, the Nazis were not like bullies because bullies don't put you in gas chambers.
Hmm.
But they had diminished the
Yeah,
horror of the Holocaust in order to try and reach a broader audience. You cannot analogize Hitler. But today, for some reason, the political opposition can't just be wrong, even misguided. They have to be existentially a threat to democracy or evil or communists or socialists or whatever.
right.
They,
Yeah,
they
this is
have,
something. Yeah, this is something we. It's Aristotle. I know you're a Greek philosopher. Aristotle defined politics as the conversation over the common good. And he had managed that politics was the highest human association because people of goodwill and of reason would get together and would debate what is the path of the common good. How can we find the common good? And this was an ideal that was adopted by the founders of this country and was practiced for a very long time. As you said, I mean, the images of political leaders from opposite parties and from other points of view coming together to debate and to come to compromises, right? Everett Dirksen, the Republican leader, talking to Lyndon Johnson about passing the Civil Rights Bill. These things happened. And then what happens then is that we've come to a place in our culture where we've killed politics. We've actually killed politics. You can't have a discussion over the common good because you define the other side as evil, as you said before.
yeah, what do you do with Hitler? You can't negotiate with Hitler.
Right. The other side is evil, so there's no compromising, there's no discussing, and therefore, there's not a lot of governing going on. You end up with a lot of executive orders. Whichever party owns the presidency is issuing executive orders because you can't really legislate very much because you can't reach any consensus. And everyone is afraid that if I were to join the compromise, then when my election is up, I'll be primaried by someone to my extreme, either left or right, and I
Correct.
and I will be castigated as a traitor to our side. And it's become a vicious it's a vicious leprosy that has attacked our political system.
Yep.
It's because you can't make reasonable decisions anymore. And the quality of discourse has become so very, very difficult. Lincoln and Douglas debated for hours, for 3, 4 hours at a time. Everything is done in sound bites in our culture, and it's done on sound bites so that you only hear the people that you already agree with, and
Right.
and you immediately block out the ones that you don't, and so you don't have a very interesting. Just politics has become kind of uninteresting, frankly, because it's so brutal. It's the World Wrestling Federation. It's Manichaean. There's good guys and bad guys, heels and faces, they call them. And they go into the ring and they beat the crap out of, they beat the stuffing out of each other. And that's called politics, right? And that's what's supposed to happen. It's not the way it's supposed to happen. You're supposed to
No.
be able to legislate together, come to compromises, shake hands, and say, we at least did this for the common good. And to look at the people on the other political side and say, they too care about the future of the country. They have a different vision.
Yeah.
You're right.
Tip
So
O'Neill
leprosy,
and Tip
leprosy,
O'Neill and Reagan
and Reagan, right.
used
Tip
to have
O'Neill,
that. And I remember the famous friendship of Judge Scalia and
Ruth
Ruth
Bader
Bader
Ginsburg,
Ginsburg,
went to
who
the
went
opera
out
together.
to the opera together. even though they were on the absolute total opposite sides
Hmm.
of the ideological spectrum. So, and it's my favorite Jewish example of that is the story of Elisha ben Abuya and Rabbi Meir. Uh, Elisha ben Abuya was an apostate. He left Judaism, but he was the teacher of the most famous rabbi of the Talmud, Rabbi Meir. And Rabbi Meir refused to stop learning from him, which scandalized all of his students. But there's a story that they were walking on Shabbos. Elisha ben Abuya was riding a donkey in violation of the uh, the gader, the ritual boundary, and Meir was walking next to him. And at a certain point, Meir turns to his atheist teacher and says, "I've been counting the hoof prints of your donkey, and we're now at the edge of the private area, and you can't go any further." And he said, "So much love." He said, and they asked, "Why could you still learn from him?" And he said, "It's like an orange." He said, "You can't eat the outside of an orange, it's bitter. But if you squeeze the sweet juice, you can love an orange." And so I squeeze the good juice out of my teacher.
Mm.
That's how I still learn from him. And if we only had that view that everyone has some good juice, and we could, learn to squeeze and find that juice, maybe we would have fewer lepers and better politics.
All right, so give me another leprosy now. So we talked about all these different social leprosies, the excluded ones in our lives, in our culture. Who else do you have on your list?
Well, I've got poor people. They're on the list. I've got people there's an obesity epidemic in America. So people who are overweight, particularly women, but I guess boys and men too, but particularly women. There's this cult of thinness, which leads to anorexia and bulimia, all sorts of eating disorders. The idea is if healthy bodies are seen as essentially scrawny bodies, then people who have normal, natural curves and bulges are going to feel like lepers. They're going to feel that they're outside the norms of beauty.
Mm.
And one of the things I used to do in my lectures to sixth graders, in my virtue lectures, I showed them pictures of Rubens' paintings.
Oh, right, right.
And in Rubens' time, the most beautiful people were corpulent because if you were overweight, it meant that you were healthy. You weren't suffering from some debilitating disease. To be thin meant that you were sick. So I said, this is another world in which being zaftig, in fact, in Yiddish, zaftig isn't an insult. Zaftig, to say someone is fat, is not an insult. It was a compliment.
Yeah.
And the idea of eat, SS, mein Kind. So I think obesity and poverty also, and then, we also have to add the lepers in our society who are people of color.
Mm.
People say, why can't they be like Jews? And we lifted ourselves up by our bootstraps and we achieved success in America. Well, hello. Have you ever looked at your skin? We're white and we can pass as white people and assimilate. If you are a person of color, you can't do that. So the idea of love your neighbor and love the stranger, I think is part of a very, very basic Jewish and biblical teaching that, as the rabbis in the Medrash said, when a king makes coins with his image, every coin is identical. But God made each of us in God's image, B'Tselem Elohim, and each of us looks different. That's the genius of God.
Hmm. Or you want use the terminology of this Torah portion. So the person who had the Mitzora, this disease,
Yeah.
um, we call it leprosy, but it was something else. But the person who was a Mitzora was sent out of the camp for a certain number of days, as you said, isolated. But then the person who would go to check on them and then eventually to heal them was the priest. Now, you would imagine it would be the opposite. You would imagine that if a person is socially excluded, then the last person in the culture who tends to them is the person who has the highest value and the highest level of purity. You would want to keep them apart. You'd want to keep the priest far apart from the Mitzvah, but it's actually the priest who is the highest value person who goes outside the camp to tend to this person and eventually to heal them,
Good point.
which is the Torah's way of saying, the responsibility of inclusion, of finding a way in and opening doors for people to remain part of the community and to be embraced by the community belongs to those who are most invested in the community and for whom the community has vested the most value. And that's the symbol of this particular Torah portion. And that's the way that the priestly code, which is this very technical, difficult code about sacrifices and ritual stuff, that's the way the priestly code affects an ethic of respect for humans, respect for souls, respect for community, respect for one another, and love your neighbor, as you said.
So I have a story to end with that answers the question. Okay, fine. So that's a good analysis of what Matzora, Tazria Matzora means in our own time. Thank you, rabbis. Thank you very much. What are we supposed to do about this? Right? So I have a story to answer that. It's from The Starfish Thrower by Lauren Isley. It's my actual favorite story of all stories, which you shouldn't take too seriously because the next story I tell you, I'm going to
It'll be
also say this is my favorite story.
okay.
But this is my favorite story of all stories. So a young man is jogging on the beach, and up ahead on the beach he sees an old man. Old man's bending down, standing up, and as he gets closer, he sees that the old man is bending down to pick up starfish and throw them. He's throwing them into the ocean. The young man jogging stops and says, "Hey, old man, what are you doing here?" And he says, "Can't you see? There was a storm and it washed up all these starfish on the beach. And I got to get them back into the ocean before the sun gets too high and dries them out and kills them." The young man laughs at the old man and says, "Old man, you're a fool. Look at the beach. It's miles long. Why, there's probably thousands of starfish on this beach. You can't get to them all. Don't you realize what you're doing just doesn't matter?" And the old man just bent down, picked up another starfish, threw it into the safety of the waves, looked at the young man and said, "Son, it mattered to that one."
Hmm.
And that's how we fix this. We take the first leper we meet, and we are uniquely and deeply kind to them. And by doing that, we throw them back into the safety of the waves. And by doing that, we know that it mattered to that one.
That's lovely. And I'll add just a postscript. Can I add a postscript to that? Because beautiful story. And what if you find yourself as one of the lepers?
Pray that someone throws you back into the ocean.
Or you find all the other lepers and you form your own circle and you say, we are the community. And
We are
if
the
they,
starfish savers.
we are the starfish. And you create a community of starfish. And if they don't want us and they're going to exclude us, they're going to lose all of the gifts and the genius and the creativity that lepers bring to a community. And that's that's the at least one other strategy if you find yourself on the outside. Mark, thank you. Let me wish you a good Shabbos. Take care.
Good Shabbos.
Stay well, everyone. Thank you for listening. Have a very, very good Shabbos.